Great. Well, hello. It's nice to be here. We have been working on this project for several years now, so it's great to kind of share it with the world. And we're going to talk about our process, about working together and the show, and then show the film and kind of then unpack that as well. So do you want to just start with how this collaboration started?
So Julia and I met through a artist network about 4 years ago in the pandemic. And in the beginning, it was just conversations between artists to kind of process this crazy moment in time. And then Julia and I started talking about perhaps doing something together, collaborating. And we wanted to, although we all, both of us have separate practices that are very much based in material, we were thinking, how can we create something that won't be kind of compromised during the pandemic? Because there were a lot of online shows of sculpture, but that's not how you're supposed to experience sculpture. So we kind of landed on this idea of creating a sound work. And we made an hour-long sound piece deconstructing the story of Eve and Adam through different kind of methodologies of storytelling, fiction, improvisation, and documentary, and created this intertwining hour-long piece. And we shared it online. And one of our supporters for that project was the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. And then about a year after or so, they invited us to, after the kind of pandemic disappeared. What happened to the pandemic? I don't know. They invited us to do a physical exhibition using those materials and that question and that story. And then we embarked on this new journey. So it was really fun that we already had trust, and we did so much research for that first piece. Then this exhibition was really about how do we create an environment that people can, an installation that people can step in and kind of go through that same inquiry that we experienced in the process of unpacking the story and questioning this fundamental myth.
And what's interesting is we sort of had to do the reverse, because when you think about sound, you have to eliminate all your associations with visuals, or you have to reinterpret visuals into something. So we worked actually with a sound artist who did Foley for us so that he would create some sound effects to help, because we were thinking very visually. So to translate into that, and big thing became about voice and texture and different opinions. And then all of a sudden we got to make the physical thing. And I think both of us felt overwhelmed with possibility, because sound was so restrictive. And now we just had to think about, we can do anything and we can build this physical world. And it really came to a head that we make work really differently, right? So suddenly this idea of me immediately going into print and you going into kind of theater, we suddenly had to merge our visual language together, which I think is sort of interesting in terms of what I think it was good we came from different places, but also this idea of like collaborating and building a world together became a whole new challenge. Right.
And I mean, we can talk just for an hour just about the collaboration and all the challenges and possibilities that brought up. But as Julia said, our process is different and our outcomes are different. So it was really interesting to see how what elements are more like Julia's voice, what elements are more mine, and then where does it touch? And we spent a lot of time in conversation and in discussion, which to us is also, it was really mirroring the process of like biblical interpretation, because definitely in the Jewish tradition that both of us come from, but in many other traditions, you take this source text. I just was yesterday at Oedipus at the Old Vic, and what is it? I mean, in all cultures, we do that. We take these old stories and then we redo them and retell them and rethink about them, and how do they offer a way to think about our current situation. So kind of needing to discuss color, texture, framework,
symbolism.
It was really kind of like engaging in this process of deep dive into text, which was really rich. And I'll just say, and maybe we can go to the next slide, that one thing, as Julia said, we had to now go back into physical world, and we really felt that we need to have some kind of anchoring thematic proposition. And we, going through a lot of different possibilities, we landed at this idea of the film studio and that place of production of narrative and production of story, and precisely the green screen as this, the green screen is just, it's nothing in the beginning, it's just the mechanics, and then you can project on it any world that you want. That idea that we have a source text, but then what kind of understandings and how does that lead to power and ideology is what you project on it. So we didn't shy away from the biblical text, but we said we want to take it and we want to express a new interpretation.
And make it relevant to today, because I think a lot of our understanding came from why is the story so problematic, and it's because it's been used, it's been, you know, people projected onto it this thing to be to hold on to patriarchal values. So the idea that, okay, what if we want people to question this, we have to give them room to have space to find their own meaning about this, and how do you do that, and what's the most popular, what's the way we're doing that today, right? And we really sort of started talking about how, you know, also going back to the pandemic, how, you know, cinema, TV, pop culture, videos, that is coming into our everyday life, and that power of the screen sort of is the big storyteller in our life.
That's what shapes how we engage with the world, how we know what we're, how we know how to understand what happens. So we kind of staged the whole gallery as a green screen production studio, and there's various elements that we'll go into, I think, in a bit.
Yeah.
But then the central, because after we did the first piece, we both felt that an element that we wanted to strengthen was really giving Eve an opportunity to tell her side of the story, and her understanding of what happened there, and a voice, a direct voice of Eve to Eve. So we made this film, which I think we'll just maybe talk
so
about.
I should just say that, like, going from audio, which we had all different parts that we dissected into this then exhibition. Yeah, what does it mean to make a film? And then again, coming back to both our processes of what does it mean to make a film when we have one more picture. If you just go to the next slide. What does it mean to make a film as artists? And also to not retell a story that everybody knows. And we had different ideas about where we were going to film this. And eventually we thought, let's do this in Winchester. So Gabriella came to Winchester, and we had, luckily, the fabulous Esther as our cinematographer. And Lucy isn't here, but Lucy was our AD, helping as well. And we basically took over. So we're going to show you the film now before we say much more, and then we can talk about how we made it and what role it fits into.
Yeah, maybe we'll just say that and need to.
I'm going to do the lights, so I've got to do something else first.
Yeah. I'll just say that we kind of commissioned Anita Diamond. She's a kind of well-known author. She wrote The Red Tent, that also became a miniseries, and many, many other books, but she's an extremely smart writer. So she wrote the script, and then we casted Mira Awad. She's a Israeli-British or Israeli-Palestinian, now living in London, as our Eve. So it was, so we'll see the outcome of it.
Let's see here.
So maybe we'll talk just a couple minutes about the film, and then we'll go a little bit about, talk a little bit about the other elements, and then
Open up to Q&A.
Yeah. So this is the other elements. I guess a lot is maybe obvious, maybe not, and you'll ask, but one thing that I was thinking we would want to share is that it also, we were thinking a lot, both with Anita and then with Mira Awad, how do we present Eve, right? It's this eternal being. So first of all, it was important for us that she's more than one, there's more than one iteration. So we see her in 3 times, almost simultaneously, right? Because we're jumping in between. So she could be saying the same thing as Mother Earth in the forest, in nature, as a printmaker, an artist, a person that's a storyteller, and also manifesting something from nothing. There's nothing there, and then she's creating a world through art, and also on the green screen as maybe a talk show host or being interviewed, but in media, in this perpetuation throughout culture of story and of ideas. So she's existing everywhere. And also, again, like someone natural and innocent, but also a maker and a physical maker, and someone soft and someone strong.
Experience and kind of maternal attributions, but also still has a life to lead. So there was a lot, Mira was like, it doesn't matter what you do, you're gonna get her wrong. Someone's gonna accuse you that she's
some trope.
Falling into something. And so we really tried hard to both accept that and also defy it in the way. And part of that was her. It was her personality, and also Anita's writing, which I think very much conveys this personality of someone who's can be both vulnerable and sort of a badass woman, which became this trope that we kept throwing out at anybody who we worked with, because it was a lot that we worked with a lot of women in this project who understood that this was a project about that we are many people simultaneously. That's like human condition, and that we're not just one trope in the stereotypes of tropes, which is really nice, maybe segue for this piece here. Because so this is the front entrance to our gallery exhibition.
And that's Anita Diamond.
Coming demonstrating. And we thought a lot about how Eve is everywhere. And when we started doing this project, and now after this talk, you'll see she's ubiquitous. Every day there's a reference somehow to her or this myth, especially in Western culture. So we started collecting an archive of anything that was sort of related to this story, and thinking about, this piece is called Pattern of Patriarchy, and thinking about taking more ownership over these images, which are constantly seen. So we have everything from Albert Durer's, A Garden of Eden to Michelangelo's, Sistine Chapel ceiling. We have Adam up there, going all the way up to, Marc Chagall's Prince to Snow White, which is sort of the Disney adventure of, a woman who has to wait for a man to wake her up.
But also the apple.
Is given an apple by the witch.
Is what puts her to sleep or almost death, right? That seeking of knowledge is a bad thing. So you have to be cautious. So we called it Patterns of Patriarchy because these are all, in the way they symbolize these ideas that women are either bad or evil or sly or weak, that men need to be careful, that the apple or the fruit is something that will destroy us. And we created this multiplicity, thinking about the kaleidoscope and how it like kind of drives you crazy, and it's everywhere and it's all around. And that's the gate or the entrance to the gallery. But then we created this portal. So you're like cutting through, when you open the door, you're cutting through that pattern of patriarchy, and now you're entering a space where we can deconstruct and re-question or revisit the story and be empowered. So that's like, you're confronted with it, but then you walk through it.
Yeah, so then you walk through, and we kind of showed you the gallery view before, but then we had this green screen, and we kept going back and forth about what does it mean to make a whole green screen. And Elizabeth, who's maybe here on Teams, is in charge of the gallery there, our commissioner and curator. She very much was like, okay, so you want a real green screen. And we're like, yes, we want, a 8 foot by 8 foot by 8 foot structure in the middle of this space. We want it to have presence. We want it to be a physical thing. And she's like, what's happening there? And so then Gabriella and I said, what's happening there? We had a whole back and forth. Would we project things? could it just be as it is? And we started thinking back to what did we want out of this exhibition in terms of viewers and their experience? And again, it came back to this idea of we don't want to have to put upon them what it should be, but give them the space to make their own myth and their own story and their own relationship with it. And so we thought for our radio piece, we actually wrote a script, which was for Gen Z interpretation of the story. So we have Gen Z Genesis, which is a radio play that we turned into a screenplay with props that we invite viewers of the exhibition to take to the green screen and act out. And they can film it on their phone at home and then go home and put any background they want to their version. And do you want to speak about like the power of theater interpretation in terms of you can make it your own?
Yeah, maybe I'll go a step backward. What I want to say is that, or that it's kind of, I would be careful in saying that we're giving the freedom to interpret the story however they want, because this is like the minute you enter this space, it's a feminist, critical thinking and deconstructing of this myth. So it, like, there are kind of boundaries, but we did show that there's, if Eve, we had her, it was really important to have her at least 3 different iterations or different places of Eve. Then in the Gen Z Genesis, it's another take on the same story. Now it's not a monologue, it's not Eve, Mirawat is, let's say, in her 40s or 50s. So we casted them as 2 16-year-olds, first kind of moving, because that's a lot of the interpretations we came to at the end to kind of manifest are based on a lot of research and brilliant academics that are reinterpreting the story. But quite acceptable interpretation is that this that Eden was a place of childhood and innocence and oblivious and but also reduced, right? They're children. They're not yet capable of also necessarily taking control of their lives. And then that there's this move through adolescence and into a place where, yes, you make mistakes and you fuck up, but you're taking responsibility for your actions and for your life, and that's being an adult. So that kind of the Gen Z Genesis is a coming of age story. That's a rom-com. It's funny, it's cute, it's nice. And then we really, as a script or as a text, it invites different bodies, and that's the place maybe of different interpretation. Also, then people can, and people did this, and it's really fun to see what kind of different backgrounds Eden is, right? Because maybe the regular way is thinking of it as a garden. But what does Eden represent for different people? But also just having different bodies, different ages, different shapes, reliving these characters and taking some kind of making it their own was really interesting. That there's a source text, but then there's also how it manifests into 3-dimension, into people. Yeah. I'll talk about the phone and then you can maybe talk about the sign. But so what we had also from so in the sound piece, I said we had also 3, I see 3 is recurring. We had 3 pieces. One was the Gen Z Genesis script. The second one was we interviewed 25 different people, also kind of tapping on different identity categories, because we wanted to kind of look at how this story manifests in different people's understandings. And what was kind of ambiguous is that almost everybody heard about the story and knew it from the age of 3 or 4 or kindergarten, or always knew it. It's in our kind of collective memory. Obviously not for everyone in the world, but definitely in Western culture, or for a vast minority, a majority of people, something that we touch upon from very early on. So we interviewed these 25 people, we asked different questions, and we then cut and pasted them and created this Greek chorus. And then what we did in this piece, in the manifestation, again, into physical, we had a telephone, and each of the buttons you press on it and you hear a different piece of that kind of Greek, why am I saying Greek? The Greek, the Greek choir. Again, this collection of different voices responding to how this story affects their lives, how they want to undo it, redo it. So that's a fun kind of thing. And
we thought about it a little bit like the producer phone, calling from above while you're on set. It's just sort of telling you what you should or shouldn't be doing in a way, because whenever we've started talking to people about the fact we were working on this project, people would say like, oh, I remember when, and then they would just tell you. So this was part of the reason. And we interviewed everybody from like my mother to a scholar. And part of the reason we did this show at GTU is because we talked to a lot of their scholars from both Islam, Judaism, Christianity, about how this story is ubiquitous across all these monotheistic religions. So the stories are both personal and also analytical, and we've cropped them all together to kind of be these different excerpts. So you can pick up the phone and be told sort of one perspective or challenge your perspective. And then that sits next to this sign that we made, sort of mimicking the on-air sign, but also thinking about the idea of the crossword. Because for me, I feel like Eden or Eve or Adam ends up in my crossword every day. And so the sense of it's always there, it's always with you, it's always. So, this is called 13 across, and it's sort of like you can fill in your own clue, like whatever the answer is Eden. So that was kind of a nice nod to that kind of conversation there.
Again, how it appears everywhere. And the assumption that we all know it, right? The question would be, what is the perfect place?
Yeah.
Eden. You have to know.
I mean, I would have called the clue, like,
Yeah.
where did he make the right choice, so. Okay, so this is the last piece we're going to talk about in the show, which is a combination of both the pattern.
So I'll say what right, in the sound piece, we had the script, the fiction script. We had us cutting up and pasting documentary or first accounts. And then when we recorded it, we had 2 actors, or actually 4 actors perform in the Gen Z, but let's say we had the actors of Eve and Adam. And then we worked with a real interfaith relationship therapist. She's been working in that for 40 years. And we had an improv session with our actors of Eve and Adam. We gave them a scenario. They're not Gen Z generation anymore. They're in their 40s. He's a academic. He just finished his PhD and he's having huge trouble finding a tenure or position. She, on the other hand, just her startup idea for this tech company is really on the rise. She's raising a lot of money. They have twin girls that are 10, and they're having marriage problems, like all married people. So we had an improv session, and it was quite amazing because Marianne, our consultant, our therapist, gave real consultation, and again, how these questions are also of relationship and gender and power dynamics and gender power dynamics are also ageless. And
we really, this came from the same root of like, when they leave, there's so much put upon the woman being the fall of man, right? So like taking that stereotype and bringing that trauma, being kicked out, where does that then sit also in modern day gender dynamics was sort of an impetus for this original situation. But what ended up happening in a way is that through this thing, we ended up hearing Marian, the therapist, as sort of giving this wisdom that felt ubiquitous, that even if you hadn't been married, that she was somehow giving us space to listen and to give us pause. And that ended up, in some ways, at least to me, being the more interesting thing, because in our radio play, we had people saying like, that was way too real. Because we had the whole thing, people being like, oh my God, just relived, like but we sort of wanted to distill that. What's the thing that the audience in an exhibition can take from? And so we thought, wouldn't it be interesting to create a space where you could put on headphones like you would in a film sound set, and just hear Marian's voice, not even Adam, responding to them, saying, now what I'm hearing is, it sounds like, and really, we then actually had real people in the chairs talking out how they were feeling because she was giving them space and time to do that. And they sit across from the photograph. You want to explain?
It's hard to see, yeah, it's hard to see in the photograph, but we created a light box, which is something I love, but it's also this liminal space or liminal object between film and photograph, because it's just a live photograph in a way. And it plays with light and shadow, and it's, again, really hard to see from this photograph, but what you see essentially in the photograph is kind of like a therapist room. There's a couch there, there's the therapist sitting on a chair, and we see her from the back, and she's quite in shadows, and the light is falling on the empty chair, but you also see tissues and water, and like someone is perhaps just went out to the restroom or is about to come in, and you hear the kind of advice and questions, and you're kind of invited to sit there and look into this live image, distilling a moment, but like a kind of like caught in the moment, and project yourself into that seat, and how this story, how these questions, how these dynamics are affecting you, and what would be your response. And I didn't know that people actually sat there.
Yeah, that's what he had said. Yeah, like what does it mean to be vulnerable? And I think that was a big underlining thing for us when we were putting this whole show together, about creating a space where people could be open and could be vulnerable and don't come in with preset values. And that's a really hard, awkward space to invite someone into, especially if you have to plan for that in some ways. So we kept attempting to have a conversation about how to do that.
Yeah, sorry. But really having, so it was, it took time to understand how it happens, but to have people kind of forced to interact, you have to pick up the phone and press, and you are invited to sit and take the props and read the script, and you're sitting and you have to put headphones, like you have to be engaged in a way. And I don't think we have a picture of this, but then as you exit the space, there's also a barrel with seasonal fruit that we got donated from it's like ongoing donation.
And it's called the Unforbidden Fruit.
So as you exit, you're invited to take a fruit, a pear, a peach, and bite into it. Like what, right, in the garden, in the story, it was the wrong thing. They were not allowed, or they were not supposed to eat from the fruit and gain knowledge. And here we're exactly saying, please eat from the fruit, please question, please, continue to be in a space of inquiry, in a space of like physical movement and physical engagement and mental engagement with these fundamental myths that are just projections, are just stories, are just myths written by people, interpreted by, in this case, mostly patriarchy. But we really have power to be the director, to be the producer, to be the actors, to redo the stories.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
I think maybe that's a good place to end and open it up to more questions or thoughts or any observations that anyone has. Yeah.
So I always, when I curate a show, want to get people's reactions, right? And one of the most interesting things to do is kind of sit in the gallery and watch people looking at the exhibition, right? And it sounds like you did some of that because you know what people were doing in response to the work. But how did you kind of gather that information? How did you experience people experiencing the show?
I don't know that we can accurately say that because we saw people experiencing the show for like 3 days.
Yeah.
So it's now ongoing. It is live. If anyone's in Berkeley, California. It's until May. So maybe they can speak more to that than we can. But we had a lot of conversations about what does good engagement look like. And to me, that's like a personal motivation in my practice. And we had different ideas about like theater and performance, and would people be willing to do this, and what would they be willing to do? And we sort of had this like, well, if they're going to be there, they should do it. It's sort of like, why not? It's a very intimate space. It's not very big. I think that going in there and being on your own, you might be more willing to kind of do it with a friend than if you were there at like the Met or the MoMA where there's like hundreds of people, but then you might have more different types of people. So we really took a risk in a way, but the idea was that it was a prompt and offer. And by offering it, then, if you want to have the richest experience of the show, you sort of have to give in and do it. Elizabeth and Lydia, who are running the space, have messaged us occasionally to tell us what's happening. Like, she's like, you know, somebody watched the film and they were the only one there and they clapped, you know, so it was like really nice to know there's like a single person clapping for a film. It's like they're showing how they're reacting, or someone responding to the audio. So, or sending us pictures of what people have done with their green screen.
We got
At home, you know, whether it be like astrology background or cactuses, or, you know, so it is, we've had to live vicariously through others, telling us about it. Yeah.
But also, I'll just, in a way, that's maybe a little bit of the difference between me and Julia. I don't actually care if they engage with it or not. For me, the green screen functions as a sculpture. And that the fact that there are props there and there is text and that there's that invitation, that's the sculpture in a way, the invitation to engage. I don't need someone to actually engage to understand that I'm saying we have the power. So
Yeah, and we talked about like how visually that is so prominent. It's gonna offer that invitation, whether they take it or not. Yeah.
yeah.
It was that very thing actually about the invitation, about the necessity to have the props, like the phone. I thought the phones, they're always very charming, aren't they? 'Cause they're not used to using them. So that's like a big comforter to engage physically. And then once you've done that, you've got some kind of buy-in. So you'll go further, and maybe you'll go home and rig up the background, the green screen. And did you? Sorry, secondly, question. Did you set up a mechanism for people to feedback those images of the green screen?
Yeah, we've had like a whole hashtag Instagram thing to kind of upload your image, you know, share it with us, you know. That's mixed results there, but yeah. And we did, it's also at a university, we should say this, the Graduate Theological Union is an operating university, and so Majubin, who is a scholar in Islamic studies, is someone we worked with, and she brought her class to talk about like women in Islam to the class, and so the whole class took part and they did the whole thing. So it did become an extension of another a classroom, if you will. So we knew that students would come in and engage with it, kind of see.
And did you have any opposition to your view of Eve, your characterization, or your various characterizations of Eve? Did anybody come in and say, now you've got it all wrong?
Interesting question. I mean, it's in Berkeley, in a academic institution. In a way, it's not challenging the audience so much. It's like so no, we didn't really have any opposition, I think, right?
We did have other people invite other theories, right? And we heard a lot of theories throughout, you know, time. And in the Gen Z Genesis, we make Eve go to an underage disco night and talk to the bartender, and the bartender is our serpent, you know, and so we had conversations about like, oh, what's the gender of the serpent, you know, because we've had all the things like, oh, it has to be a man who's manipulating Eve. No, it has to be a woman who's like propping her up to stand up. No, it has to be a trans person because, you know, it's really not about that, and it's about this kind of omnipotent empowering
and it's an inner voice.
It's an inner voice. So right, what, you know, so lots of opinions about just that character.
We did, as we were working on it and also writing the scripts in the radio play, we did get a lot of pushback about this, that everything is a trope, right? She's either too feminine, or if she's pushing back against femininity, then she's like only showing masculinity traits, or too motherly or too intellectual. We got pushback from, I remember specifically like
actually at our Q&A at the opening, somebody asked us like, what about Adam? You know, which I very much wanted to be like, it's not about Adam. So yeah.
I got stuff in the chat.
Okay.
There's some comments and then there's a question. So Elizabeth Pina said, report from the field, we've had visitors laugh at the film and even clap, people acting out scenes, taking time to listen to the therapy session and eating unforbidden fruit, and some writing on the pomegranate wall. They have 2 class visits upcoming in Jewish studies and feminist theology. That's the comment, so everyone knows what I'm saying. And then Julia Greer asks, Did you ever question that it was Eve who initiated the original act? If the story had been written by women in its origin, would it have been Adam?
Okay, so that's an interesting question, and we did our initial research. We've talked to these two women who run this thing called Torah Tau, where they're rewriting the entire Bible gendered through female pronouns and female switching all genders. And so in that instance, that would be the case. And we actually think that the story, right, I mean, this is a main thing, is like totally misunderstood, because we think that she does make the right choice. Like, she does propagate the idea. She makes an analytical decision to eat the apple and leave. It's just the way it's interpreted is seen. So
I think if we would write it, Eve still would be the protagonist and the initiator, because if not, we would all be these like little babies, like that. Like we this is humanity. Humanity makes decision, makes mistakes, does things, creates things. It's just not wandering around the garden and just enjoying what is already there, but for good and for bad, a lot of bad, as Eve also puts out, a lot of bad, but that's humanity. And hopefully one day it will shift, that we use our ability to create worlds and our analytical abilities and our knowledge to create better things. But you can't not make mistakes, and you can't not be, I mean, Eve shows that we have power to do stuff and
take action.
Yeah, I mean,
take action.
That
was a big thing. That was a big underlining thing. Like, she takes action. She's not passive. So we wanted the show to be active. We wanted to give viewers an ability to take action. And to be totally honest, I don't think we were interested in it being Adam, you know.
Those are the only questions and comments in the
Okay,
chat.
great. Thank you. Yeah.
So
My question is, have you gone easy on patriarchy? Is it like a gentle scolding of patriarchy, or kicking the balls? I don't know, is it? I don't know.
Well,
I don't, yeah.
it wasn't, we didn't want to make a piece that was about us being angry. You know, there's a lot of anger about patriarchy, and there's a lot of, this is wrong, and this is unfair, and this is unjust, and this is the problem. We wanted to say, this is a woman who should be listened to as somebody who is actually upholding values that we can connect to, and is a great, we think women should be, and we think that other people should think of that, as opposed to holding on to all this anger and not use her as a tool to support and purport all these other conventions, but actually see her as this other thing. And in order to give room to see her as another thing, bringing anger into the conversation just didn't feel productive or interesting to us. We wanted to create more of an open-ended place to have that conversation. It seems too stereotypical to go into the, you know, I don't know, being upset about some of those, about that issue. Not to say that we're not, but it wasn't the underlying seed or our approach to take it on that way. And we do have voices on the telephone of our Greek choir who are really angry about it, you know, who are really, you know, like, this is messed up, you know.
And how, yeah, and a lot of personal stories, how it ruins our life, and how it really pigeonholes us and manipulates us and takes our freedom. But I think really for us, the pivotal thing was kind of like this whole bubble of patriarchy, and just a ding, you just misunderstood it. Eve actually is awesome. That was like our thing, not to engage in a combat with it. Although I love doing that and other stuff, but here it was just how, again, not saying we need to write a different story. This story was misunderstood because what she did was the correct action.
And I will say, so I made another piece that we didn't show, that was a screen printing piece that is called "It Wasn't an Apple," because in the biblical text, it's a forbidden fruit.
And everybody remembers it.
Everybody remembers it as an apple. And it really annoyed me, because I was like, this is a perfect metaphor for this story. Because if you read it closely and you understand that it's not an apple, you also understand that she's an analytical, interesting woman. And If you don't, then you start to make assumptions and you can run away with your patriarchal interpretations. So if you start to really nitpick it, maybe you see a different perspective.
But but it's a pomegranate. So
Well, I mean, that was our interpretation, right, as the artists. So
that is a theory, isn't it?
yeah,
That's one of the
that's one of the theories.
Because
Yeah.
it made me think of Emil, what's she called? Jemana Emil Aboud.
Oh, yeah.
She's a Palestinian artist. She made a video of her trying to put the seeds back in. It's called pomegranate. And then it made me, because that's generally understood about displacement and right of return, all of that sort of stuff in a kind of very obvious way. But if you think about it with this, I mean, because that's what's great about myths is they're structures and they can be turned inside out and moved around and everything. Then it becomes this kind of irreversible act. Eve sets things in motion.
Yeah.
So it's the invention of irreversibility as well.
Well, that choices define you,
Yeah.
and
then
that's
it's
scary,
ethical-
right?
Ethical consequences as well.
I mean, also in the Greek myth of Persephone, it's the pomegranate seeds that she eats and then she's taken, to the underworld. But even that, irreversible in a way, but then half a year she's underground, half a year she's, like, that's why we have winter and summer, or like, that's why that makes sense, right? And you need winter and you need summer in order to have vegetables and fruit, like it needs that, like, it can't be without complexity.
We heard a lot of theories about why it was an apple, or misunderstood as an apple too.
Yeah.
French colloquialisms getting misunderstood in early painting,
Okay.
12th century.
Yeah, it's easy to paint, that's why.
It was easy to paint, and more people read paintings than read books because there wasn't so much text flying around, so. Yeah, complicated. Any other thoughts, questions?
I have a quick question. What is in the photo book? It was the photograph.
So, right, so it's this beautiful photograph that Gabriella took that's actually of her mother sitting in a chair, and you only see the back of her. And she's sitting in front of what we're trying to orchestrate as almost a therapist office. So there's a sofa and there's a glass of water and a coffee table and a box of tissues. And these are my very subpar photographs. We had a professional photographer come this week, so we can send you higher res if you're interested.
I will say, not that you asked, but because we didn't talk about it, but in the back, it's the second iteration of the pattern of patriarchy, which has additional images. So it is different than what you have in the entrance, but we printed it on semi-translucent vinyl, and it's on the windows. So you have at certain times of the day the light coming through, and it looks like a church stained glass. And thinking about how these institutions also perpetuate these stories, church or whatever religious institutions, how it's part of the structure.
It's interesting how those kaleidoscopic patterns have been kind of used by feminists, something like Helen Chadwick, Devon Show, but also by Gilbert and George, like the others end of the spectrum. Yeah, it's an interesting form.
And then somebody was just telling me when we were there about how kaleidoscopic feminism is a thing. That's a terminology into kind of like restructuring the architecture and conversation and discourse about feminism. So, yes, totally planned.
I also think it's interesting how you have Snow White in the entrance, and how you said it was like a portal, because in the biblical reference it's a snake, and the snake is a gendered snake and it's a man. And then obviously in the show, in the fairy tales, it's always a witch. It's always a
Woman.
nasty woman witch, ugly looking woman witch.
Yeah.
presenting an apple, and it's just interesting to see how
Yeah,
things change, even though in how things have changed basically.
yeah,
How stories are
exactly.
being told.
And you have so many historical depictions, like drawings of the story of Eve and Adam, where you have the snake with the head of Eve. To me, like, even if it's a male snake or a symbol of masculinity, it will have the head of Eve because the character of evil is feminine.
Just curious if they, with Snow White actually, did you reach out for the city to Snow White?
Yeah.
And did they? Okay, yeah. Chasing the copyright, I was just pretty curious.
Isn't it old enough to be? I
Yeah,
think it's old enough
this
to
whole thing that we
be.
kind of just over 60 years old,
Oh, yeah.
and
It would be great press. If
but yeah,
we were,
we're waiting for Disney to call us.
sued by
The
Disney.
problem.
They do go after people.
Yeah,
They do.
Yeah,
yeah.
taking out murals and all kinds of stuff. Yeah, yeah. That Snow White won't be out of copyright. No way. Not that image of that.
No, it's just, I was wondering, it's just quite interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
If they have
Mhm.
input or, you know, they,
Mhm.
by Disney would have thought about that interpretation. I think that.
Mhm.
that's
Probably
quite
not,
interesting.
but
Yeah, that's why
Yeah,
I asked that.
And honestly, we hadn't really thought about it, and well, I hadn't really thought about it until like, yeah, I then really am now obsessed with this story, so it
Mhm.
becomes this whole thing where I see it as an act of empowerment to take a bite out of an apple. So many of these stories see it as an act of empowerment.
Can you talk a little bit about the prints?
Yeah.
that You were making and that she was making in the film.
Yeah, so I mean, when we thought about Eve having a job, we were like, she should have a job. And we really thought about like, we wanted her to have a job that somehow was not just domestic, like being in a kitchen or sewing something or being in a library but we didn't want it also to be like that she was in a boiler suit, you know, being an engineer. So what's the role that Eve can play? And I thought about the print workshop, not only because I spent a lot of time there, but I also see a lot of men and women in the print shop. And there are physicalities about that action and about that, but it's also very feminine too. So I think for me, it sort of made sense to make her a printmaker in a lot of ways. And there were a lot of, also color is a big thing for me. So we color blocked a lot of that film, thinking about richness of like the green screen, and then thinking about the print room, and wouldn't it be great for her to have red? So using that and her blue denim dress and apron. And so there was a lot of like kind of building her into a laborer, but also like a sexy woman. And so her printing, those were my wood blocks that sort of were just my interpretation of this pomegranate, this forbidden fruit, that she might be, you know, making to propagate that. But I wanted to give her something really, and we wanted her to do it the whole way through. And I think there's something nice about you watch the print progress throughout the show, throughout the film. It's also a nice showcasing of the WSA print room. And on the opening night of the Q&A, somebody did say, like, tell me about the Alexandra press. I was just so surprised to have someone paying so much attention to the nuance of that press. But I was delighted to talk about the press. So
I love that she had dirty fingers on that when she had this, does that sign on there?
yeah, clean hands only.
And the kind of the thing about the sin is on her hands as she's held it, you know, it's present on it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we wanted her to do something, and a monologue is hard. And we talked to Anita a lot about what does it mean to write a monologue for film as opposed to theater. And we don't have her doing a lot. She doesn't physically do a lot in this, but that, you know, is something that she could physically do in time. Great. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Yeah.
Thanks for people on Teams. Okay. Cool. Thank you. And thank you, Adam, for running all the text tonight. That was a lot.